It began with a shocking idea, an experiment in murder. Two wealthy young men from Chicago, brilliant but arrogant, convinced themselves they could commit the perfect crime. They weren't driven by desperation, nor by money, nor by revenge. They were driven by something far darker, a desire to prove their superiority. This is the story of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, a case that stunned the world in 1924 and forced America to confront the disturbing depths of human psychology. Chicago in the 1920s was a city of contradictions. On one side were glittering skyscrapers and the booming energy of the Roaring Twenties. On the other, gangsters like Al Capone ruled the streets. Prohibition fueled corruption and crime. Stories filled the front pages daily. But nothing prepared the public for what would come next, not from hardened criminals, but from two boys born into privilege. Nathan Leopold was just 19 years old, a child prodigy with an IQ estimated at 200. He spoke multiple languages, fluently excelled in philosophy, and was studying law at the University of Chicago. His fascination with Friedrich Nietzsche led him to embrace the concept of the Übermensch, the idea of a superior being who was not bound by ordinary morality. Leopold believed he might be such a man. Richard Loeb, 18, was equally intelligent, but more outgoing and charismatic. The youngest graduate ever from the University of Michigan at that time, he had a passion for detective novels and crime stories. Unlike Leopold's deep obsession with philosophy, Loeb's fascination was with action, adventure, and transgression. Together they were a dangerous mix, Leopold's theory and Loeb's appetite for thrill. The two met as teenagers and quickly formed a close bond. But their relationship went beyond mere friendship. By most accounts, Leopold was deeply infatuated with Loeb. He idolized him, often doing whatever it took to win his approval. Loeb, on the other hand, enjoyed being admired and indulged. They created a private world where ordinary rules no longer applied. They began committing small crimes, vandalism, theft, arson. Each time they tested boundaries, asking could they get away with more. But Loeb wanted something bigger, something that would set them apart from everyone else. Together they devised a plan to commit the ultimate crime, a murder, not out of hatred, not for profit, but simply to demonstrate that they could do it and never be caught. It was, in their words, a crime for the sake of crime. Their meticulous planning reflected their arrogance. They decided to kidnap and murder a young boy, then demand ransom from the family. It would be the perfect crime, a demonstration of intellect and control. After weeks of planning, they chose their victim, 14-year-old Bobby Franks, Richard Loeb's own neighbor and distant cousin. On May 21, 1924, Leopold and Loeb put their plan into motion. That afternoon, Bobby was walking home from school. When the two approached him in a rented car, they offered him a ride. Bobby, who knew Loeb personally, accepted without hesitation. It was a fatal mistake. Once inside the car, Loeb reportedly struck Bobby in the head with a chisel while Leopold drove. They gagged him, then shoved him onto the floor. Within minutes, the young boy was dead. They wrapped his body in blankets, drove to a remote culvert near Wolf Lake, and shoved his remains into a drainage pipe. To conceal his identity, they poured acid over his face and genitals, believing it would erase recognition. The next step was ransom. Leopold and Loeb mailed a letter to Bobby's parents demanding $10,000 for his safe return. They carefully crafted the note using pseudonyms and detailed instructions. But even as the family prepared to follow the demands, Bobby's body was discovered earlier than expected. A man walking nearby spotted it, and the illusion of the perfect crime began to unravel. Police immediately launched an investigation. Chicago was horrified, a wealthy young boy brutally murdered with no clear motive. The case dominated headlines. Detectives scoured the area for clues. At first, there was no clear suspect until one piece of evidence emerged. Near Bobby's body, investigators found a pair of eyeglasses. Not ordinary ones, but a unique pair with a special hinge produced by only 3 customers in Chicago. One of those customers was Nathan Leopold. It was the crack that broke the case open. When police questioned Leopold, he tried to explain away the glasses, claiming they must have fallen out during bird-watching trips. But inconsistencies mounted. His alibi was shaky, and Loeb's story didn't align with his. Under pressure, both young men cracked. In separate interrogations, each confessed and blamed the other for Bobby's murder. What emerged was a chilling portrait of premeditated, calculated violence. The nation was shocked not just by the brutality but by the killers' identities. Leopold and Loeb weren't gangsters or drifters. They were privileged, educated, and came from wealthy families. If even boys like this could kill, what did it say about human nature? The trial of Leopold and Loeb became one of the most famous in American history. Their families, desperate to save them from execution, hired Clarence Darrow, the most famous defense attorney of the era. Darrow was known for his opposition to the death penalty, and this case would become his most legendary battle. The evidence against the two was overwhelming. They had confessed. They had detailed the planning. They had shown no remorse. Public outrage demanded death by hanging. But Darrow chose a different path. Instead of arguing innocence, he pleaded guilty on their behalf, forcing the case into a sentencing hearing rather than a jury trial. Darrow's strategy was not to deny the crime, but to argue for mercy. Over the course of a 12-hour closing argument, he made one of the most powerful speeches in American legal history. He painted Leopold and Loeb as products of their environment, their youth, and their psychological instability. He argued that executing them would serve no purpose, that society should rise above vengeance. He asked the judge, "Should we kill boys barely out of childhood to prove that killing is wrong?" Darrow's words resonated. In September 1924, the judge sentenced Leopold and Loeb to life in prison, plus 99 years sparing them from execution. The decision shocked many, but it cemented Darrow's reputation as a master of courtroom persuasion. Life in prison, however, would not be simple. In 1936, Richard Loeb was attacked and killed in prison by a fellow inmate. Leopold survived, serving more than 3 decades before his release on parole in 1958. He moved to Puerto Rico, worked as a medical technician, and lived quietly until his death in 1971. The case of Leopold and Loeb has lived on for nearly a century, not only as a shocking crime, but as a study in psychology, morality, and justice. Their story has inspired books, plays, and films, including Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, loosely based on the murder. Scholars still debate the deeper meaning. Was this simply the arrogance of youth unchecked by morality? Or was it proof that privilege and brilliance can twist into something monstrous? At its core, the Leopold and Loeb case forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of our morality is shaped by choice, and how much by circumstance? Can intelligence become a weapon when it detaches from empathy? And what happens when the desire to be extraordinary erases the value of ordinary human life? For Bobby Frank's family, the answers came too late. A young boy's life was stolen for nothing more than an experiment in superiority. For society, the case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil does not always come from the shadows. Sometimes it comes from the privileged, the educated, the ones who believe they are untouchable. Nearly 100 years later, the story of Leopold and Loeb continues to haunt because it feels timeless. It is the collision of brilliance and arrogance, of privilege and cruelty. And it is a chilling reminder that the search for the perfect crime can end only in tragedy. Because no crime is ever perfect. There are always cracks, always consequences, and always eventually a reckoning. As the decades pass, the names Leopold and Loeb remain etched into history, not as supermen above morality, but as young men whose arrogance destroyed a child, shattered families, and left behind a story that still disturbs the conscience of a nation. And so we return to the question. They ask themselves, could they commit the perfect crime? The answer is written in history. No. Because the moment their arrogance touched innocent life, their fate was sealed. Their crime wasn't perfect. It was human, it was flawed, and it was unforgettable, and it was